What's up, guys? If you want to follow the most interesting and exciting crime stories, I ask you to subscribe to the channel and activate the notifications button to receive a new story every day. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a like.
The factory was eerily quiet as Harvard made his rounds, inspecting the machinery and ensuring everything was in working order. He had always been meticulous in his job, aware of the potential dangers that lurked in the shadows of the nuclear reactors. But recently, he had noticed strange occurrences that unsettled him deeply. Workers would disappear for days, only to return with unexplained deformities or severe illnesses. The management brushed off these incidents as isolated cases, but Harvard knew better. He had seen the fear in their eyes, heard their whispers of something far more sinister happening behind closed doors. One night, as Harvard was finishing his shift, he stumbled upon a restricted area he had never seen before. The door was slightly ajar, and a faint, eerie glow emanated from within. Curiosity got the better of him, and he quietly pushed the door open. Inside, he found rows of computers and monitors displaying alarming data. Radiation levels were off the charts, and there were files detailing containment breaches and nuclear leaks. His heart pounded as he realized the magnitude of the situation. The factory was a ticking time bomb, and the management knew it. Harvard quickly copied the files onto a flash drive, knowing he had to act fast. As he turned to leave, he heard footsteps approaching. Panic set in, but he managed to slip out of the room unnoticed. That night he couldn't sleep, haunted by the images and information he had uncovered. The next day, he confided in his closest friend at the factory, Mike. Mike was a seasoned worker, having spent over a decade in the industry. He listened intently as Harvard shared his findings, his face growing pale with each revelation. "We need to get this to the authorities," Mike said firmly. "If what you're saying is true, everyone's lives are at risk." But it wasn't that simple. The factory was owned by a powerful conglomerate with deep ties to influential figures. Exposing them would require concrete evidence and a strategy to avoid retaliation. Harvard and Mike began to formulate a plan, aware that their lives would never be the same. They decided to start by gathering more evidence. Over the next few weeks, they worked covertly, documenting every irregularity and securing testimonies from affected workers. It was a dangerous game, and they knew they were walking a fine line. One evening, as they were reviewing their findings in Mike's garage, they heard a knock on the door. It was Sarah, a former employee who had mysteriously vanished months ago. She looked frail and terrified. "They're watching us," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They know what you're doing." Harvard and Mike exchanged a worried glance. The stakes had just gotten higher, and the clock was ticking faster than ever. They had to act before it was too late, before more lives were lost to the factory's deadly secret. The gravity of Sarah's warning weighed heavily on Harvard and Mike. They knew they had to move quickly and cautiously. The next day at the factory, Harvard could feel the tension in the air. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, every move scrutinized. During his lunch break, Harvard met Mike in the secluded corner of the factory's storage room. "We need to get these files to the media," Mike whispered, looking around nervously. "Going to the authorities might not be enough. We need public outrage to force action." Harvard nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. "I know a journalist," he said slowly. "She's an old friend from college. If we can get the information to her, she might be able to blow this wide open." They agreed to meet that evening at a local diner, a place they hoped would be safe from prying eyes. As Harvard walked back to his workstation, he felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He had a nagging feeling that their plan, no matter how carefully crafted, was fraught with danger. That evening, Harvard and Mike arrived at the diner, their eyes darting around the room for any signs of surveillance. Harvard's friend Jessica was already waiting at a corner booth. She looked up as they approached, her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "Harvard, it's been a while," Jessica greeted, her eyes narrowing as she noticed their tense demeanors. "What's going on?" Harvard quickly briefed her on the situation, showing her the files he had copied. Jessica's face turned pale as she read through the documents, her hands trembling slightly. "This is huge," she whispered, looking up at them. "If this is true, it's a major scandal." but you have to be careful. Going public with this could put you both in serious danger." "We know," Mike said grimly. "But we can't just sit back and do nothing. People are dying, Jessica. We need your help to get the truth out." Jessica nodded, determination in her eyes. "Leave it to me. I'll start investigating and prepare the story. But you two need to stay low and avoid drawing any attention." The following days were a blur of anxiety and covert operations. Harvard and Mike continued to document everything they could, while Jessica worked tirelessly to piece together the story. They communicated through encrypted messages, each day bringing them closer to exposing the truth. One night, as Harvard was preparing to leave the factory, he noticed a black SUV parked near the entrance. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see inside. His heart skipped a beat. Were they being followed? He quickly texted Mike, warning him to be careful. As he walked to his car, he tried to remain calm, but his mind was racing. Every shadow seemed threatening, every noise amplified in the silence of the night. The next day, Mike didn't show up at work. Harvard's heart sank. He tried calling, but there was no answer. Panic set in. Had something happened to him? Harvard decided to go to Mike's house after work. When he arrived, the door was ajar. He entered cautiously, calling out Mike's name. The house was eerily quiet. Suddenly, he heard a faint groan coming from the garage. He rushed in to find Mike lying on the floor, bruised and barely conscious. "Mike, what happened?" Harvard exclaimed, kneeling beside him. They know," Mike whispered, struggling to speak. "We have to finish this, Harvard. Get the files to Jessica, before it's too late." Determined and fueled by fear for his friend's life, Harvard knew there was no turning back. The factory's dark secrets had to be exposed, no matter the cost. With renewed resolve, he vowed to see their mission through to the end. The sight of Mike in such a state shook Harvard to his core. He helped Mike into the house and made sure he was comfortable before heading out. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on him, knowing that their lives were now on the line. Harvard drove to a nearby park where he could think clearly. He pulled out his phone and sent an encrypted message to Jessica, detailing the latest developments and Mike's condition. He knew they needed to accelerate their plans before the situation escalated further. Jessica's response was swift. "Meet me at the old warehouse on River Street. We need to talk in person." As Harvard arrived at the warehouse, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He parked his car discreetly and slipped inside. Jessica was waiting, her face a mask of concern and determination. "We're running out of time," Harvard said, cutting straight to the point. "Mike was attacked. They know we're onto them." Jessica's eyes widened. "This is worse than I thought. We need to release the story immediately, but we need to ensure our safety as well. I've contacted a few trusted colleagues. We'll work together to get this out quickly." Harvard handed over the flash drive containing all the evidence they had gathered. "This is everything. Radiation levels, the secret files, testimonies from workers. It's all there." Jessica took the drive and nodded. "I'll start working on the story tonight, but you need to lay low, Harvard. They'll come after you next." The following days were filled with tension and anxiety. Harvard stayed hidden, moving from one safe location to another. Jessica kept him updated, letting him know that the story was almost ready for publication. One evening, Harvard received a frantic call from Sarah. "They're looking for you, Harvard. They've put out a notice claiming you're a suspect in some bogus theft at the factory. They're trying to discredit you." Harvard felt a surge of anger. "They'll stop at nothing to protect their secrets, but we won't let them win." Jessica called shortly after. "The story goes live tomorrow morning. We have everything ready. Once it's out, the media frenzy will protect us to some extent. They won't be able to silence all of us." That night, Harvard couldn't sleep. His mind was racing with thoughts of what might happen next. As dawn broke, he received a notification on his phone. The story had been published. Headlines blared across major news outlets. "Nuclear nightmare. Factory cover-up exposed." The article detailed the hazardous conditions, the secret files, and the horrific health impacts on the workers. Jessica had done a brilliant job piecing together the evidence into a compelling and damning narrative. The public outcry was immediate. Protests erupted outside the factory, demanding justice for the workers and accountability for the factory owners. Government officials were forced to respond, launching an investigation into the allegations. Harvard felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time in weeks, it seemed like they might have a chance at bringing the truth to light and ensuring that those responsible faced the consequences. However, the factory's owners were not going down without a fight. That afternoon, as Harvard was watching the news, he received a call from an unknown number. "You think you've won?" a cold voice sneered. "This is far from over. You and your friends will pay for what you've done." Harvard's blood ran cold. The fight was far from over, and he knew they were still in grave danger. But he also knew that they had the power of the truth on their side. And with the world now watching, they had a chance to turn the tide and bring justice to those who had suffered in silence. Harvard felt a chill run down his spine as the call ended. The threat was real, and the stakes had never been higher. He needed to stay vigilant and protect those who had risked everything to expose the truth. He immediately called Jessica, updating her on the threat. "We need to be careful," Jessica said, her voice steady but laced with concern. "I'll notify my colleagues and make sure we have extra security. We can't let them intimidate us into silence." The next few days were a whirlwind. The media frenzy around the factory scandal grew, with news outlets from around the country picking up the story. Protesters gathered outside the factory gates, demanding accountability and justice for the workers. Government officials promised a thorough investigation, and Harvard hoped that this would be enough to bring about real change. Despite the growing public support, Harvard couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. One evening, while he was staying at a friend's house, he heard a knock on the door. He peered through the peephole and saw two men in suits standing outside. His heart pounded in his chest as he opened the door slightly. "Can I help you?" "Mr. Harvard," one of the men said, flashing a badge. "We're with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to speak with you." Harvard's mind raced. Were they here to help, or was this another attempt to silence him? He decided to take a chance. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. The agents entered, their expressions serious. "We've been following the developments at the factory," the lead agent said. "We need to ensure your safety and gather any additional information you have. There are powerful people involved, and this situation is extremely volatile." Harvard felt a wave of relief. "I have everything you need," he said, handing over a second flash drive with copies of all the evidence. "But you need to protect the others involved. My friend Mike was attacked, and there are others who are at risk." The agents assured him that they would take the necessary steps to provide protection and pursue the investigation. As they left, Harvard felt a glimmer of hope. With the FBI involved, perhaps they had a chance at truly exposing the factory's owners and holding them accountable. That night, Harvard received a message from Jessica. "Stay safe. We're making progress, but be prepared for anything." The following morning, Harvard awoke to find news of a major breakthrough. Several high-ranking officials from the factory had been taken into custody for questioning, and more arrests were expected. The investigation was gaining momentum, and it seemed that justice might finally be served. However, the fight was far from over. As Harvard was watching the news, his phone buzzed with an urgent message from Mike. "We need to meet. I found something important." Harvard's heart raced as he read the message. He quickly got dressed and headed to the rendezvous point, a secluded park on the outskirts of town. When he arrived, he found Mike waiting, looking anxious but determined. "I've been digging through some old files," Mike said, handing Harvard a folder. These documents show a direct link between the factory owners and several high-ranking government officials. They've been covering up the leaks for years, and the corruption goes all the way to the top. Harvard's eyes widened as he flicked through the documents. This was the smoking gun they needed. With this evidence, they could bring down not just the factory owners, but also the officials who had enabled their crimes. "We need to get this to the FBI," Harvard said, his voice filled with urgency. "This changes everything." As they made their way to the FBI office, Harvard couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. They were on the brink of exposing a massive conspiracy, and justice was finally within reach. He knew that the road ahead would be dangerous, they would need to stay vigilant to see this through to the end. Harvard and Mike approached the FBI office with a sense of urgency. The folder Mike had uncovered was their most critical piece of evidence yet. As they entered the building, they were greeted by the same agents who had visited Harvard previously. "We've got something big," Harvard said, handing over the folder. "These documents link the factory owners to high-ranking government officials. They've been covering up the leaks for years." The lead agent's eyes widened as he scanned through the documents. "This is incredible. If we can verify this, it could blow the case wide open. We'll need to get this into secure custody and start cross-referencing immediately." Harvard and Mike were taken to a secure room where they spent hours detailing everything they knew. The FBI agents worked tirelessly, cross-referencing the new information with their existing evidence. It was clear that the conspiracy was much larger and more entrenched than anyone had realized. As the night wore on, Harvard and Mike were provided with temporary protection, staying in a safe house while the investigation continued. Despite the looming danger, there was a sense of cautious optimism in the air. The FBI was making progress, and the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. The next morning, the news was dominated by the factory scandal. High-profile arrests were being made, and the public outcry was growing louder. People demanded accountability, not just from the factory owners, but from the government officials implicated in the cover-up. Harvard received a call from Jessica. "You've done it, Harvard. The story is everywhere, and the authorities are finally taking action. But you need to stay safe. There are still dangerous people out there who won't hesitate to silence you." Harvard thanked her, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. He knew that while they had made significant strides, the fight was far from over. There were still powerful forces at play, and they needed to stay vigilant. That afternoon, as Harvard and Mike were discussing their next steps, they received a visit from a high-ranking FBI official. "We've verified the documents and are proceeding with the investigation at the highest levels," the official said. "Your safety is our top priority. We're relocating you both to a secure location until this is over." Harvard and Mike were moved to a remote cabin in the mountains, far from the prying eyes of those who might wish them harm. The isolation was both a blessing and a curse. While it provided safety, it also left them with plenty of time to reflect on the gravity of their situation. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Mike turned to Harvard. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't taken that first step? If we'd just turned a blind eye?" Harvard nodded slowly. "All the time. But I know we did the right thing. Those people needed someone to stand up for them, and we couldn't just ignore what we knew." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a helicopter approaching. They rushed outside to see an FBI helicopter landing nearby. An agent stepped out and hurried towards them. "We've received intel that there might be an attempt on your lives," the agent said urgently. "We need to move you to an even more secure location immediately." As they boarded the helicopter, Harvard couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The forces they were up against were relentless, and it seemed that no matter how much progress they made, the danger was always just a step behind. The helicopter took them to a fortified facility deep in the heart of the mountains. The security was tight, and Harvard felt a sense of relief knowing that they were safe, at least for the time being. Over the next few days, the investigation continued to unfold. More arrests were made, and the scale of the corruption became increasingly apparent. The factory owners and their government allies were facing charges that ranged from gross negligence to outright conspiracy. Despite the progress, Harvard knew that their fight was far from over. There were still powerful figures who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. But with the FBI on their side and the public demanding justice, he felt a renewed sense of hope. They had come this far, and Harvard was determined to see it through to the end. No matter the cost, he knew that they had to keep pushing forward, exposing the truth and ensuring that those responsible were held accountable. The days at the secure facility were filled with constant updates and briefings from the FBI. The investigation into the factory scandal continued to gain momentum, with each new piece of evidence bringing the case closer to a resolution. Harvard and Mike remained under tight security, their movements closely monitored to ensure their safety. One afternoon, as Harvard was reviewing some of the latest reports, he received a call from Jessica. Her voice was tense but hopeful. "Harvard, we've got some more information. The factory's owners are trying to negotiate a settlement. but they're also planning something drastic to try and discredit the investigation. Harvard's pulse quickened. What do you mean? Are they trying to sabotage the investigation? Yes, Jessica replied. They're spreading misinformation, attempting to paint you and Mike as rogue elements with ulterior motives. They're trying to undermine the credibility of the entire case. Harvard clenched his jaw. We need to counter their lies. If they succeed in discrediting us, all our efforts will be in vain. Jessica agreed. I'm working on a counter-narrative to expose their attempts to mislead the public, but I need your help. We have to make sure that the truth doesn't get buried under their lies. As Jessica worked on crafting the counter-narrative, Harvard and Mike began to prepare for the possibility of public testimony. They knew that their first-hand accounts could be crucial in maintaining the integrity of the investigation and ensuring that the truth remained at the forefront of the media coverage. One evening, while Harvard was reviewing the evidence, he received a visit from an FBI agent. We've received credible threats against your lives, the agent said. There are plans to silence you permanently. We're increasing your security and moving you to a new location. Harvard felt a chill. The threats were becoming more tangible, and the danger was growing. He and Mike were swiftly relocated to an underground facility designed for high-risk protection. The facility was equipped with state-of-the-art security systems and was virtually impenetrable. In the safe house, Harvard and Mike tried to stay occupied with their preparations. They reviewed the evidence and worked with the FBI to ensure that all critical information was accounted for. Despite their efforts, the feeling of isolation and the constant threat of danger weighed heavily on them. One night, as Harvard was trying to sleep, he received an urgent call from Jessica. Harvard, there's been a major development. The factory owners have been caught attempting to bribe key witnesses and destroy evidence. This could be a turning point. Harvard's heart raced. That's good news, but it also means they're desperate. We need to stay sharp. The following morning, news outlets were buzzing with reports of the bribery scandal. The public's outrage intensified, and pressure on the authorities to act grew even stronger. The factory owners were facing increased scrutiny, and the investigation was gaining unprecedented traction. Despite the progress, Harvard and Mike remained in hiding, their safety remaining the top priority. The FBI continued to investigate the threats against them, working tirelessly to ensure that they could eventually testify without fear. One evening, as Harvard was reviewing the latest updates, he received a visit from a high-ranking FBI official. We've made significant progress, the official said. The evidence is overwhelming, and the factory owners are facing serious charges, but we need your testimony to seal the case. Harvard nodded, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. We're ready. We want to see this through to the end. The day of the testimony arrived, and Harvard and Mike were transported under heavy guard to the courthouse. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation as the courtroom filled with reporters, legal experts, and government officials. As Harvard took the stand, he looked out at the sea of faces, feeling the weight of their expectations. He took a deep breath and began recounting the events, detailing the hazardous conditions, the cover-ups, and the corruption he had witnessed. His testimony was powerful and compelling, providing a clear and irrefutable account of the factory's wrongdoing. The courtroom was silent as he spoke, the gravity of his words resonating with everyone present. When the trial concluded, the verdict was a significant victory. The factory owners and their accomplices were found guilty on multiple counts, and substantial penalties were imposed. The case became a landmark in the fight against corporate corruption and negligence. As Harvard and Mike left the courthouse, they felt a profound sense of accomplishment. They had faced immense danger and adversity, but had succeeded in exposing the truth and bringing those responsible to justice. The victory was bittersweet, marked by the sacrifices they had